Greetings everyone, it is Zakes here and we are back with our weekly videos, and this week we are talking about protectionism. And if you're a regular watcher of our videos here at home, you should know that protectionism is something that we've covered in the past, right? But it is a popular issue, depending on which lens you choose to look at it from, right? If you're a follower of US politics or politics in general, which would include US politics, you would know that a protectionist just got voted into the White House in Donald Trump, and he is in favor of tariffs. If you follow local news, you would know that our South African Revenue Service is has instituted a new tax on imports from China from, institutions like Shein and Temu, which will lead to an increase in prices. That is just, point blank period. But the intent behind that is to encourage local industry and make sure that, our local retailers are competing on an even footing with their Chinese counterparts. At least that's according to our tax collector. So as you have just heard from the rundown, right? Protectionism is a pretty topical issue. That is why we're talking about it again. And I was fortunate enough that just a couple of days ago to conduct an interview about this very issue, the Shein and Temu one. So I thought, let us talk about it, right? What is protectionism? Well, it is pretty much making people pay more for goods and services that are imported. So this is a tax that a state would charge its citizens for buying goods from a foreign jurisdiction. So in South Africa, any tax that is put on goods from the European Union, from the People's Republic of China, or from the United States, that would be a form of protectionism. And it is called protectionism because the motivation behind it, since really hundreds of years ago, right, if you were to even look at the Corn Laws in England, is that it is meant to encourage local industry in some form or shape, right? Look at Donald Trump. Donald Trump, the reason he's a huge fan of tariffs on Chinese goods especially is because he wants to make America great, according to him, which involves improving the manufacturing capacity of, the American jurisdiction. And that, to do that, he wants to make it so that Americans pay more for Chinese goods so that they would then eventually buy American goods, which are already expensive, right? Like, the motivation for protectionism is, it loses me at the very least, because I'm like, what happens when goods are just expensive across the board? It's just that people will not buy them, right? So that leads to a depression of the quality and standard of life of your own citizens, all to spite, a foreign power that is making things cheaper for you. Like, of all the bad things that could happen to a people or a group of people, I don't think that getting things cheaper is the worst of them. But that is just the free marketeer in me talking, right? There are people who are pretty opposed to this, which is why in South Africa we have, things like the institution of the Shein and Temu tax at the behest of, our local manufacturers. So as I was doing an interview just a couple of days ago about this issue, I was asked, why is it that South Africans cannot make goods as cheap as the Chinese make them, right? Why is it that Americans, if you're watching this for some reason from the United States, why is it that, Americans cannot make goods as cheap as the Chinese, the Tanzanians, or anyone really? The reason is because of the Chinese labor market. The Chinese labor market in large part is dynamic enough to enable freedom of contract, and that freedom of contract other people see as exploitative in some instances. And I will not sit here and say that there aren't instances whereby, even I don't think that certain terms are exploitative or not, but the beauty of liberty is that I would never personally agree to those terms that I consider exploitative. But who am I to say that someone else should be barred from even, entering into those contractual relationships, which is what things like the minimum wage or general employment conditions that are put on hiring do, right? They set terms for contracts before the two parties to that contract have even met, have even had a meeting of the minds, to use, a legal term for all my, practicing jurists there, they will understand. So really, this is the reason why the Chinese can manufacture things at a cheaper rate, it is because they understood, as even though they are ruling parties, communists, that a labor market needs to be dynamic. A labor market needs to respect the freedom to contract. That will then have a ripple effect on improving the economy, because people will be engaged in productive activity, irrespective of what you think of the terms of that productive activity. And well, what are the results, right? Let us look at the results. The results of the Chinese having what many consider an exploitative labor environment, but I would consider a dynamic labor environment that respects the right to contract, is that they are now the second biggest economy in the world. If you were to speak to any South African politician, they stand in admiration of the Chinese economy, as everyone across the world should, right? The Chinese have lifted their people out of poverty at a rate faster than any jurisdiction has ever done in the history of, like, recorded history, really, right? So, like, that is something to be proud of if you are a Chinese person, or even, you know, a member of the Chinese Communist Party itself, right? Because this is something that they achieved, and in large part thanks to, you know, men like Deng Xiaoping in the 70s and 80s, really respecting and understanding this necessity of liberty and the right for people to contract, even in terms that a lot of people may not find desirable, right? The long-term effects of it is that it just gives your people skills that are pretty indispensable. And now the Chinese economy, as I have mentioned, is really close to being the biggest in the world, but it isn't currently. It is the second biggest, and one would say that it is one of the most important economies in the world, seeing as they have such a high manufacturing capacity, and they pretty much make each and every good that we enjoy all across the world. And what is the result of not following the Chinese example, for lack of a better term, of having a dynamic labor environment? Well, you end up having economies that are hollowed out, as we have in South Africa. Certain industries, like our textile industry, is essentially dead because manufacturing is so expensive, thanks to the other extra costs of compliance with our legislation, that is just simply untenable for anyone to manufacture. And those who do manufacture find it very hard to penetrate a market that is dominated by goods that are cheaper, even though they are traveling thousands of kilometers to, you know, away from China to South Africa, right? And the result then is, you know, a depressed economic environment and depressed economic activity in certain industries and sectors, particularly manufacturing. So this is the cost of, you know, not, for lack of a better term, having an exploitative environment, which is really an environment that allows people to contract, that recognizes, you know, the freedom of contracts of various people, and really allows the market to play its role, right? Not to say that the state should not enforce violations of rights whenever they occur. They should always do that, but there should be an understanding of the freedom to contract if we also want to make things at a cheaper rate and probably have as big of an economy as the Chinese do. So do tell us what you think. Are you in favor of protectionism, right? Do you think that countries should put as many tariffs as is possible to protect local industries? Or maybe you are like me, a free marketeer. You think all trade, or trade, should be as free as reasonably possible. And that is a position that I'm happy to, you know, sit in, a camp I'm happy to sit in and hopefully defend, should you be interested. So please do tell us what you think, and share the video, like it, subscribe if you unsubscribe, and always remember to stay free.